I don't have some thoughts. So this video is one from Siggy Snake, and the thesis in the title, of course, is gaming isn't fun anymore. And this is something that a lot of people I see assert all over the place. I know this might be like kind of surprising. I generally have a little bit more of an optimistic outlook on this. It's really basically like, it's really, really easy to like cherry pick examples of games that are just lifeless, soulless, that are just sucky, and be like, oh, the industry's dying. But you have to look at the whole thing. Like, you have to look at the whole industry, the fact that nowadays games are more accessible than ever. Indie studios are more successful than ever before. We have scalability with engines like Unreal Engine 5 that make bigger games more doable for smaller teams. Like, we've got some amazing games that have come out. And so while it's really easy to point at a couple of bad apples and be like, see, the whole the whole orchard is ruined. We've got these bad apples here in this basket. But behind you is the whole orchard filled with a lot of really good apples. It can be, something where you can kind of cherry pick, or I guess in this analogy, apple pick. And it proves your point or helps try to argue your point. But I don't think it proves your point. I think often it's just cherry picking. So I think it'll be interesting to see in this video how much nuance is added here, because I will agree, like, multiplayer FPSs, I would say those aren't really fun for me anymore. Those have grown pretty soulless. I think is a lot of it. False expectations, Rari, thank you for the 199. Yeah, I think false expectations are, like, I think that is a big part of it. I would agree with you. That's why Luke be saying don't get overhyped. Exactly. And I think that's why it's important to be skeptical of things and to not embrace hype as something that's good for its own sake. Some people get really triggered when I do the, like, don't get too hyped thing. And I get it. It feels like I'm raining on your parade. I totally understand that. And I don't mean to, like, be the negative Nancy that makes you upset or makes you feel like you can't be excited about stuff. But the reason that I come in these videos and say, I get we're all excited for Hogwarts, but let's level this out with some of the pros and the cons. So when the game comes out and isn't perfect, you aren't, like, devastated and you aren't shocked that it's not perfect, right? And so I want to just add a little bit of nuance back into the conversation. But people see that and think of it really, really negatively. And I can understand that, but, what are you going to do? Proto, are you telling us to be a spectacle? Basically, yeah. It's just, I think, in my view, like, it doesn't make any sense to me when people are like, no, you shouldn't be skeptical of things. It can ruin the fun. For me, I'm like, if I'm skeptical of Hogwarts Legacy and I go into it expecting it from that team to probably have some technical issues, which is what I said before launch. I said, I think we're probably going to see some technical issues, performance issues, things like that, because every other time we've had a massive game come from a smaller team, like Days Gone, it launches with a lot of technical issues. And guess what Hogwarts launched with? Technical issues. So, shocker. Made sense. But guess what? If you go into a game skeptical and then the game ends up being awesome, you're all the more excited. Like, that hype is concentrated into your gameplay experience, and you're all the more excited. But if the game sucks, and I've been skeptical, I'm not, like, my day isn't ruined. I'm like, oh, well, that's a bummer. Poo. Like, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're hyped about a game and it ends up sucking, you're going to be devastated. Can you imagine if Hogwarts Legacy ended up being like 10 hours long and it was just a broken pile of garbage? And I mean, people would have been devastated. People would have freaked out. They would have gotten depressed. They're like, I've been looking forward to this game for a decade, and now it's just, oh man. And it's like, yeah, well, we tried to warn you. But the game ends up being pretty good, and so we're all pretty happy. It's pretty straightforward. I don't understand how people can be like, no, skepticism is like if you want to hate yourself. It's really, really weird. Anyway, but back into this, I'm much more inclined to agree with the thesis that multiplayer FPS gaming isn't fun anymore, because I generally agree with that. I think it's all very kind of brain dead at this point. They just rely on the laziest of content additions and reskins of weapons you've already bought that they charge you $20 for, and they break the game intentionally constantly. All of that stuff. As for like general gaming isn't fun anymore, that I don't buy. So we'll see. Yeah, sports games, I would argue, have not been fun for many years, but that's a whole separate issue. Okay.
Game industry of today, you might think gaming is in a golden age. Video games have never been more popular. Professional gaming is a growing and respected sport, and game publishers see record profits year after year. This surface-level success, however, conceals many of the core issues plaguing modern games.
To be clear, the games industry is healthier than it's ever been. Like, the industry is healthy. Yes, most of that success of the industry is tied up in mobile games and microtransactions. I agree that that's not ideal. But the industry, without a doubt, is bigger and healthier financially than it ever has been.
Monetization, egregious laziness, and a total lack of passion or vision. In terms of quality and actual care put into games, modern gaming has been on a consistent decline for close to a decade now. From predatory microtransactions, to broken, unoriginal games, to the current drought of new and interesting IPs, gaming has been reduced from a form of entertainment and artistry to a corporatized money-making venture. As someone who...
I would argue it's always been that. It's always been a corporatized money-making venture. So I don't see how that's new. This has always been the case. Like, do you think Nintendo was not a corporation in 2002 that was primarily concerned with increasing revenues? But, like, this has always been the case.
Who's been into gaming for the vast majority of my life, as someone who genuinely appreciates the passion and artistry present in games, this mass corporatization and denigration of the medium is depressing at best and infinitely vexing at worst. I know I'm not alone in this stance either. The countless failures and disappointments of the modern games industry has left...
Cyberpunk 2077 is nearly unplayable on PS4. Sorry for the rant post, but this is inexcusable. Totally agree. Totally agree. Microtransactions becoming a norm, borderline ruin new age gaming for anyone else. Okay, yeah. I could agree with that. I mean, the problem with like so much of this though is, again, these types of things only happen because people engage with them. Like, if you hate reaction content like we're doing right now, why are you watching it? Like, if you're watching it, like, that's part of the reason we do it, right? Like, that's part of the reason reaction content exists, is because the main reason, honestly, is because it generates views and people watch it and enjoy it. So it's, I understand microtransactions are annoying and frustrating, but the reason that they do it, like, is because people buy it at the end of the day. Like, if people didn't buy it, they'd figure it out. I think the reason we don't see loot boxes in all these games is because people weren't buying them and engaging with them as much. So they shifted towards this Fortnite, Call of Duty, Warzone model of charging $20 for a skin. And weirdly, people are buying it. It's really, really weird. I think part of this, though, honestly, is with these particular types of games that heavily monetize skins and things. I think it's because, let's be real, everybody wants to be a streamer. Everybody wants to be Tim the Tap Man and XQC and Nick Merckx. Like, everybody wants to do that for a living and be rich while doing it. And there's this weird perception that you have to, like, in a lot of ways, imitate them. So if you're a streamer with 10 viewers and you really want to be the next Tim the Tap Man and you're playing Call of Duty, if there's a gun that, like, breaks the meta, like the DMR back in the day or the Gallantry Mac 10, you're going to buy it because, like, you have to be competitive. You want to play well so that you can keep growing as a streamer. So you're going to buy it and you're going to justify it to yourself as a business expense, right? So you're going to engage with it, even though, like, you're making the problem worse. And I think because there are millions of people that are trying actively to do the streamer YouTuber thing, try to get there, I think a lot of people are engaging with these microtransactions while actively detesting them and preaching their hatred for these things. And I think that's borne out by the fact, like, I know for a fact, a lot of the people that hate on microtransactions probably also have bought microtransactions. Like, a lot, I'm guessing. Same with people who are pissed about $70 games. Well, if you don't want to pay $70 for games, if all of us refused to pay it until it dropped on sale down to 60, then boom. Crimson, I'm proud of you. Rocky, I'm proud of you. And Bep, I'm very proud of you. A hell of a lot more people than you three are buying microtransactions, and that's why they keep doing it. But I'm glad you are doing it and you are sticking to your guns. I'm very, very glad. Problem with that, dude, is that everyone is waiting for everyone else to start doing it. Well, I mean, it's the same thing like with like voting in general. Like people are always saying, well, I don't know if I want to vote for this thing because, you know, one vote, or I don't know if I want to bother going out to vote in this election because one vote isn't going to make a difference. It's like one vote doesn't make a difference, but a sea of people making one vote does make a difference. If everybody comes together and it's just like, no, I'm going to stick to my guns, I'm not going to buy this, and that's it, just as a matter of principle, you'll see a change. And that's the thing, like with the NFT things, there was that article that people wrote where it was, good job, internet, you bullied NFTs out of mainstream games, or at the very least made fun of them enough to keep us all from losing our grip on reality. Yeah, it ended up being like, yeah, good job. Like, actually, good job. Not like sarcastic, good job, internet, but like, good job, internet. But like, this is the thing. NFTs were such a cringe thing, and so few people bought them in the few games that launched with them, that now they've largely been bullied out of major games. Like, even though companies like Ubisoft have invested tens of millions of dollars into these things, it's basically a waste. GameStop famously spent like $100 million developing an NFT marketplace that now is like a total waste. Like, nobody is going to use it. It's a waste of money. But they did that thinking that they could cash in on a quick trend. But because the gaming community as a whole came together and said, we're not doing that. Nope. They stopped, right? So if you're really pissed about microtransactions, we all just have to come together and refuse to engage with it. I would, the problem is that there's just so many people that are still going to be engaging with microtransactions, because there's a lot of people, and this is the other part of it. We are kind of in a weird niche right now. I'm going to be real. Not many people, not even most people, I would say are like watching active gaming YouTube content. Not many people are watching YouTube streamers and things. Most people have like one or two games that they play every year, and they play the crap out of them. It might be FIFA, it might be Madden, and then Call of Duty or some other multiplayer game. And that's generally how this works, is that there's like one game that they love, and they play that one game like crazy, and they spend money on microtransactions, they do all of this stuff. That's most people.
$33.81.
Oh, thank you.
The odd microtransaction if I choose to, as long as it's not cutting game content and rammed down gamers' throats.
Yeah, and I will say, Sean, the exception I make for microtransactions, let me be clear, I'm not one of these purists. I'm not as cool as like Rocky, for example, or Crimson, where I like come out and I'm like, I don't buy any microtransactions. I'm okay with spending $5 on a skin if it's a game, especially that's free to play. Like Valorant. Valorant, great game. Their skins are really expensive, so maybe that's not a great example. But like maybe Overwatch 2 or maybe Apex or something. It's free to play. I got this game for free, and I've put hundreds of hours into the game. I'm okay tossing them $5 for a cool skin on my main character. I don't have a problem at all with that, because it's a free-to-play game. So yeah, I'll give you a little kickback because you've provided me so much entertainment, right? So I don't have a problem with that. The reason they break it up into so many smaller transactions is to, one, offer a ton of variety. So if you want to customize each aspect of your character, you can do that, and they can charge you each step of the way. And then also they want to do that because the hope is you spend $5 here, next week you spend another $10, the week after that you spend $7, and before you know it, in the span of like 6 months, you've actually spent $250 on the game when you didn't even realize you were doing that. That's the other piece of it. And that's what like is particularly slimy about microtransactions, which I totally agree is slimy. Dan, by the way, thank you for the 550 Canadian. Thanks for preaching this, Luke. As someone who works in the industry, it's very frustrating to hear modern gaming is dying. It's not at all. Yeah, it's the easiest like clickbait thing to get videos to do well, to take the side of like Reddit and just be like, yep, everything sucks. And it's just kind of lazy. I'm hoping that this guy gets into a little more nuance and isn't just saying the gaming industry is a joke now, because it's clearly not. And even as you're saying, like the artistry in video games has disappeared. Like there's this amazingly artistic games that are releasing constantly, especially indie titles are more enabled to succeed than ever. There are more publishers that are approaching indie studios and offering them publication deals than ever before. I know somebody who runs a fund. It's not really a hedge fund, it's a private equity fund, but basically he got a bunch of rich people together, and then they go out and they find indie studios and smaller developers, throw money at them to develop a game, and then they get the rights to publish it, and then they get like 10% royalties, blah, blah, blah. But like, I know people that do this actively, and they didn't do it 5 years ago, and there's many of them that are doing it now.
Left most gamers tired and frustrated. To that end, I want to chart the slow descent of this once great industry. Look at where it's heading.
Oh, he just said once great industry. Okay, it's going to be one of those videos. Buckle up, boys. It's about to get stupid.
And what we should do in response. Like and subscribe. Before we can discuss the dismal state of modern gaming, I want to first look at the era which preceded it, along with what made it unique. I think few would argue that the mid-90s to late 2000s was a true golden age of gaming, and for a number of reasons. While the actual quality of games from this time period can't be understated and will be discussed, one of the biggest factors in this golden age was the state of gaming and the broader games industry. Gaming was considered a more nerdy or unusual hobby back then. You weren't getting bullied at school for not having the latest Fortnite skin, but for playing video games in the first place. This relative unpopularity meant that the games industry was just a fraction of its current size.
A lot of this is starting already to sound like a negative recency bias. So basically a hatred of things newer and a love of things retro. And that's also tied up in sort of a nostalgia bias as well, where it's things were good back when I was a kid because I played those games and those games are so special and I love those games. Like, and I get that, but you don't get to just say that the games industry is dead. The games industry is dying. It was once great, now it sucks. Like, you have to justify those claims. You don't get to just say that. Like, I'm going to call you on it. I would love for you to justify it, because, like, if the games industry is actually dying, I'd like to know that, especially as somebody who relies on this as a living. You know, it's the same exact argument that people make when they're, like, really, like, it's the old guy sitting in his lounge chair freaking out about, you know, American football used to be great. Back in the 70s, they barely wore any pads at all. And now they wear all of this padding and they look like a bunch of pansies. And this is garbage. It was all trash. There's too many rules now. You know, it's the back in my day garbage thing that we're used to, like, our grandparents doing. And it seems like that's kind of what this entire video is.
Firstly, game developers and publishers were much more numerous back then. Various small and
Wait, what?
Conversely, game developers and publishers were much more numerous back then.
This is just not true. How do you say with a straight face that in the 90s there were more game publishers and developers? Like, this is just objectively, provably, and demonstrably false. I don't want to beat up on this guy, to be clear. Because he's got a small channel. He's chasing the dream, and I think he's got a lot of potential and talent. He's got good scripts, and he's editing stuff well, to be clear. But like this whole video so far is just like it's heavily biased. You're not justifying your claims. You're just asserting stuff. And some of the stuff you're asserting is laughably bad. Like, and laughably and provably false. I just don't get it. I don't know. We need a second crash of the video game industry where all those corrupted and greedy corpos go bankrupt and vanish. I don't think we need that crash, actually. Like, the games industry in the 80s was very different from where it is now. Now, and really the problem in the 80s, because what he's referring to, for those of you not aware, basically back in like the 80s, there was a big gaming crash and it was all tied up in the fact that a lot of video games were being just shoveled out. It was basically shovelware. You know, it was garbage like games like the ET game is the one that's commonly brought up, where it is like a 10-minute game. It's laughably bad. It's thrown together quickly. They charge $60 for it, and they would put it on a store shelf. People would buy it, get home, and be really disappointed. Now, the reason why that became a major issue is because of a lack of communication, reviews, and infrastructure to establish quality of games. Now, with YouTube streaming, game reviewers being ubiquitous, this type of thing is just not on the same level. If a game sucks ass, everybody will know. Anybody who wants to know will know. So if they launch Callisto Protocol and the PC port sucks, people will find that out. So it kind of, the market is able to correct itself right now, whereas in the 80s, before the internet, there wasn't any means of doing that. You would just go out, buy a game, hope it didn't suck ass. And a lot of the time it did suck ass because they knew that they could sell you a broken pile of garbage and there was nothing you could do about it. Now on Steam, you buy a terribly optimized port like Wild Hearts and it sucks, you just refund it within 2 hours. You refund it, get your money back. You buy a console game, it sucks, return it. You can do that. Like this type of thing is just so toxic. Like calling for a gaming crash. Like it's one of those things again that people just say and they don't think about what they're actually saying. But then, you know, you have 1.8 thousand people that come in and like the video or like the comment, even though like this is just kind of like dumb. I get the idea. You want greedy corpos to go bankrupt and vanish. I totally agree with that. I would love that. But nobody wants a second video game industry crash. And if you're calling for a crash of your industry that you call home, I'm not sure that you actually are welcome there. I think you should reevaluate. I don't think you're actually a gamer. I think you're a contrarian who's kind of a negative Nancy a little bit. Like, so I don't know. If he's like, if this whole video, we're 2 minutes into the video and he's already asserting things that are laughably and demonstrably false. So I don't know if we want to, I honestly, I don't really want to go through 16 minutes of this with just more bald-faced assertions that aren't backed up and that are laughably bad. So let's try this other one that is perhaps a little better from the pie face. Let's see if he can justify the idea that gaming isn't fun anymore. And I hope that this is a little more nuanced than just the industry sucks because in the 90s I played games as a kid and I liked those games more. Let's see.
Listen, guys.
Already this reminds me of Clean Prince Gaming's videos with the VHS tapes. You remember those back in the day?
Here's the thing. I'm old. I have gray hairs. But there's one thing that's been in my life since my hair was short and full of color. And that's video games. But recently, I've realized that I spend a lot more time consuming content about video games than I do actually playing video.
Dude, do you see the comments?
A lot more time consuming.
This must have been when he did a video on was Atrac the streamer who was caught with like the web page up and he was watching some videos or something. Like I think that's what it was. Yeah, that is him. Okay. Yeah, this I don't know why he chose this clip. This is funny because this isn't really a gaming clip, but that's pretty funny.
About video games than I do actually playing video games. In fact, in the past couple of years, there's been months at a time where I did not play a single minute of video games. And it most certainly is not because I'm a busy and accomplished adult with a roaring career and social life, because quite the opposite. My life mostly revolves around watching YouTube videos, streams, and shows, but I actively miss playing video games and spending countless hours immersing myself in creative worlds and game systems, and it seems like I'm the only one with this problem.
I'll be real, dude. You're not alone. You're not alone. I've been in this too, okay? I've been in this rut as well. Back in like 2018, I went through a rut that was really bad like this, where I would sit down at my computer and I would like say, I want to play a game tonight. And I just couldn't come up with anything. I was like, everything I booted up was kind of like, been here, done that. I just wasn't that into it, you know? I needed to reboot. And that's, for me, it was like God of War 2018 gave me a big boost. And then Red Dead Redemption 2 was like supercharge. So I don't think you're alone, to be clear. I think that this is a common thing. It happens in every hobby. You know, back when I was playing like competitive chess, going to tournaments and stuff, I would get burnt out right around the time that the tournament year ended, around like May or April. I would just be so burnt out that I would need a break. I would go off, I'd do something else. I'd get really into some other little hobby over the summer. And by the time the fall came around, I was ready to jump back in. So this is something that like is common. I don't want him to feel like this is weird or abnormal. This does happen. It's called burnout, and it happens a lot. And whenever I run into burnout, you have to just rediscover the fun. Sometimes that means taking a break and doing other things. You know, get really into lifting, get really into hiking or swimming, or do something else, just something different. And it's also about finding whatever that game is that's going to reignite that spark. And sometimes you have to wait a little bit for that, but it just depends on when that falls. Because for me also, I was starting to feel really burnt out, and then Elden Ring hit, and I played the ever-living crap out of Elden Ring. So, you know. Sophie, I had this exact issue literally at the end of last year. I wasn't excited about loading my PlayStation for a good couple of months. Yep, it just happens. I need to do cardio, but it's so boring. I agree. It is very, very boring. What I've done is I find, like, for me, it was Deadliest Catch. You remember that show from back in the day? Watch a whole episode of Deadliest Catch. The agreement is I'm going to walk on the treadmill or jog on the treadmill or do the Stairmaster until this episode is over. And because it's like high drama intensity reality crab fisherman TV, like it's intense, I find myself regularly like hyper engrossed, so the time flies by. I'm gonna be real.
All of my friends still have the games that they're obsessed with and play all the time.
Sorry, this is so derpy.
I personally don't enjoy most of those games since apparently I'm a boomer that hates games now.
Sure are.
So what's the deal? Am I growing out of this hobby that I've loved for so long? Or perhaps I'm just jaded from the infestation of corporate greed and its insatiable hunger for infinite growth afflicted upon us at every corner, in every game, with cash shops and battle passes, so many battle passes, and coins, and the crystals you have to buy, and the crystals, you don't get the right amount of crystals, and it doesn't make sense for all the items in the shop because you have a little left over because they want you to spend more money. Or maybe games are just bad now.
Or maybe you're just burnt out, which happens to everybody. I love gaming. My life is based around gaming. And I get burnt out. It happens. But people like look for a solution to the thing, or they look for a cause. They look for a reason that they feel burnt out or are feeling this way. And sometimes it's just, you played a lot of games and now you're burnt out. Take a break. That's okay. It's not to say that the games industry is dying.
Or is it some other nuanced collection of reasons that I'm going to spend the rest of this video exploring and talking about? Yeah, no, games are definitely just bad now.
Win me over, my friend. Win me over. I want to be convinced. But just like the last video with the last guy, I'm not going to let you just say shit, okay? So let's back it up. This is straight up clean prints. Talk about nostalgia. This is straight up clean prints. The VHS going in there. At least I think this guy has better like delivery of his script. I'll give him credit. How big is he? Oh, he's like a 5.57 thousand. He's doing, I mean, this is pretty good quality for a small channel. Music volume could come down a little bit. I'll be real, but script is good so far. I'm interested. I'm captivated. I think his delivery is really solid. So props.
It was the early 90s. One of my earliest, most vivid memories of...
Already, first thing that jumps out to me, already we're seeing this like negative recency bias and the nostalgia bias coming in. The 90s were great because that's when I was a kid and I loved games back when I was a kid. So now games suck because they're not the same as when I was a kid, you know?
Video games? was the Christmas that I got a Super Nintendo. I got this Mickey Mouse game called The Magical Quest, starring Mickey Mouse. I remember just laying down in my living room for hours playing on my little CRT TV. It was like crack to my tiny little underdeveloped brain, just seeing pixels.
Sorry, that's awesome. This little girl cranked up on the cotton candy. Oh, dude, by the way, I am a sucker for cotton candy. Don't mess with me when I'm on some cotton candy. I go hard. I love me some cotton candy, man. It's a problem.
Pixels moving at my command. I was hooked. And that was it. The floodgates were open. Throwing Foot Clan ninjas into the screen in Turtles of Time. Collecting all the letters and Donkey Kong Country.
Stomping Koopas.
And Super...
Oh, Chris! Chris! Damn it! Stomping Koopas. Oh, goodness. See, again, great editing. I'm still not sold he's going to justify any of this, but good editing, man. Good clips.
Super Mario World, solving puzzles with all the cool items and the Link to the Past, that kick-ass intro in Super Metroid. I was hyped and stressed out of my little mind for that. This era was peak gaming and would forever solidify me as a Nintendo fanboy. But then, a few years later, the most fateful day of any kid growing up in the mid-90s, the Christmas where I got my... It was that sick-ass green one that was bundled with Donkey Kong 64 and that little RAM pack. But now, games were 3D. Donkey Kong, Mario, Zelda all had an entirely new dimension to explore, opening up so many gameplay options. But that wasn't all, because you could play with 4 players. Mario Kart, Mario Party, Smash Bros.
I will say, I was not like old enough to appreciate this generational leap, but I can only imagine how exciting it must have been to go from 2D to 3D. Like, it must have been amazing. It must have just been like a whole new world. Like, it just magic, pure magic. I can only imagine. Because now, like, each generational leap is like, oh, now it looks a little better. Or now we have subsurface scattering for skin. Like, it looks a little better, you know? But that was like the change.
Super chatted $5.
Thank you.
TBH, I think we loved games more as a kid cause we were just kinda dumb. You play old games now and they feel awful.
I think the naivete is certainly a factor. Because I've played a lot of games, as a kid, when I was allowed to play games, I had a lot of fun with some objectively terrible games. We played so much Minnesota Cuke. Dude, which was like a Donkey Kong Country ripoff. We played so much of that. And we had so much fun with it. Even though that game is objectively very, very bad. It's terrible. But when you're a kid and you aren't allowed to have just any game you want, you just end up making the most of what you get. And so you delve into the games that you have and you really enjoy them for what they are because you don't know any better. But as you get older, I think this is, I agree. I think part of what happens is people get more context. They have more things to compare the games they're playing to. And so they start to notice the problems and nitpick it. And let me be clear, like, I am somebody that for a living, I break down games and I critique them and I do this day in, day out. But for me, critiquing and nitpicking games allows me to gain a deeper understanding and appreciation even of what the games are doing well. And when a game does something well, I appreciate it all the more because I've critically analyzed all these other games and that game in question. So I really get to know it very, very well. But for some people, breaking down games in that hypercritical way can actually ruin it for them. It can actually make the game like... It can make them not like gaming because they start to break it down and it feels like they're just tearing things down. So not everybody should do the kind of thing that like I do, to be fair. My brain works in a weird way where the more I tear things apart, the more I appreciate them. I don't know. It's like, you know, if I was that kid who like, there's a cool Lego set. I want to take it apart to figure out how you put it together. And that will make me appreciate it more. But some people would be like, why would you take it apart? Then it's no longer together, you know? Rocky, so you're a cynic. Basic.
The rise of party games. You can sit on the couch with your friends, smacking controllers out of each other's hands, accuse them of cheating, ruin friendships. It was great.
Accuse them of they were cheating. Let's be real. I will say, this is one thing you will get me on, and I will agree with you. The loss of split screen gaming has been a travesty. We need to bring that back. Split screen gaming is a treasure. It is in and of itself magical, and we need to bring that back. I will argue that point to my death. Like, dear God, we need split screen gaming again.
But party games weren't the only thing that benefited from the 4 controller slots. Multiplayer first-person shooters. My friends and I spent countless hours on Goldeneye 64. We even used to get cardboard boxes and tape them up to the screen to section it off.
So you're a Civic. Yes, Honda. Quite. Dude, I miss my Honda Accord so much. You guys know, I was like a responsible adult and I sold my Honda Accord because it was expensive and I use it like once or twice a week. I miss that thing so much. It's only been gone like 6 months.
Rari2XX super chatted $4.99.
Thank you, Rari.
When I had the DS, I was excited. Sonic Rush, The Incredible Hulk, Mario, Megamind, etc. PSP with GTA and GAO also. I love gaming to this day. I'm 20.
Yeah. Well, and you know, maybe as this guy said, you just aren't old enough to really become depressed and cynical. But you know, you still have a healthy attitude towards gaming, which is good. But I'm sure the day will come when you start to feel a little burnt out. I'll be real, a lot of the burnout people feel is usually right after a game they were really excited for flops and is terrible, and then they get super disappointed because they were hyped. So one of the reasons I try to talk people down off the hype cliff, because in general I think it can do a lot more harm than good. And it can cause a lot of people to just feel like, screw this, you know, so I think that's part of it.
Also, that you can screen look, we took that shit very seriously. Now, by this time, first-person shooters already existed on PC, but I had the crappiest Dell that was cheap and out of date, even for the late 90s.
For real though, you can find these on YouTube, these old compilations of Office Rage, where they had like the Office security cameras, and it's from like, almost all of them are from the 90s, early 2000s. And you get to see people just explode on their computers and hardware. It's honestly one of my guilty pleasures. If you ever want a good laugh, just look up like vintage Office Rage compilation, and there's a surprising number. It's honestly pretty funny. Carl, thank you for 2 months. The reason I know I can be blindsided by nostalgia is because I enjoy Crash Twinsanity more than most really well made and polished games that release now. But you're aware of it, and that's good. That's hilarious though. Okay, hear me out. Hogwarts Legacy, I was super hyped. I'm 8 hours in and I don't even and now I don't even open it. Explain this. So you were super hyped. You're 8 hours in and now you don't even open it. So it didn't live up to your expectations, you mean, Rocky? Like you were super hyped and like the energy you had for the game was burnt before you even got the game? What it might have been is like you just got so excited, all of your energy for Hogwarts got expended before you even got your hands on it. And then it came and you're like, okay, well, what now? You know?
Though I was still able to play Bang.
Bep, Terrell Washington had a super chat apparently and it didn't get through. Oh, really? Hold on. Sorry, ever since we moved over to Stream Elements, occasionally they don't go through. I've been trying to watch it and catch them. But, oh yeah, I missed a couple. Oh, I bet it's when the stream died for a little bit. I bet that reset some of it. Okay, let's see. Okay, Terrell Washington, yes. Blurry, Frozen, Cursed. Luke was Maddie's revenge. Blurry. Oh, yeah, yeah, Maddie came back. At least the freeze for the stream was not nice and long. Moa. Oh, poor Maddie. And then Basit, thank you also. Luke, I get that you disagree with this title, but it could be worse. Imagine gaming didn't die. It was murdered and Fortnite players pulled the trigger. That, you know what? It could be worse. Isn't it funny though? Like both of these like old school games are better. Gaming sucks now. Gaming's dead now. The industry is terrible. All of these videos are eerily similar to the old essays of Clean Prince Gaming. who was well known for his X game didn't just die, it was murdered. Like, and he really was the centerpiece of preaching like hyper negativity about video games. It's really interesting to me. You know, it's interesting.
Like Roller Coaster Tycoon, Age of Empires.
Dude, Roller Coaster Tycoon. I watched a documentary. I know this is going to take like half an hour or 2 hours to get through, but you know, that's why this is how we do it. Okay. When we do reactions to content, I try to add something. And so I'm not just sitting here watching a video like other streamers. So when I have something to say, I'm going to pause it. You know, I'm going to speak my mind. In this case, I will say I watched a documentary on the creation and development of Roller Coaster Tycoon, and oh my God, it will make you appreciate so much more that game. It's like honestly pretty amazing what they like, how this dude built this game. It's unbelievable. Makes you really, really appreciate the game.
Empires II, Starcraft. I knew the PC was eventually going to be where it's at for me. But for now, the next console era was upon us. I really feel like there was 2 games in particular that defined this generation for me personally. The first game was Smash Bros. There were so many more characters in the first game, so many more stages. It controlled beautifully. It was a masterpiece. One time my parents made us go play outside, and so we stuck the TV up against the window and threw the controllers out there, and so we were all just standing outside playing Smash Bros through a window.
That's honestly pretty hilarious. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody else doing that, but that's freaking awesome.
And the second game was TimeSplitters 2. From the same developers of Goldeneye, TimeSplitters would become my favorite shooter to this day. The game had an insane amount of game modes, tons of characters, a map editor that you make your own story missions. It had it all. One of my friends was a genius when it came to making maps, and every time we got together, he had a couple new maps that had some interesting gimmick that completely changed the way we played the game. One of my favorite maps of his was one where it was just this square. It was like a grid of rooms with doors, and we would run around with one shot, one kill baseball bats. It was terrifying. If you've
it almost gave me a stroke just watching that. Oh,
never played TimeSplitters, I'm sorry, you're really missing out.
but this is another one of those things with the nostalgia bias. We can look at this now, and honestly, if I tried to play TimeSplitters, I probably would think it sucks because we're playing it nowadays. But same thing, like I played the ever-living crap out of Red Faction multiplayer back in the day because it had the destructible environments. Red Faction 1 multiplayer. I played so much of this back in the day, I can't even tell you. We had friends over, we'd do stuff, and bro, I played so much. And so I look at this and I get like tingly feelings in my belly. I'm like, oh, it's so great. It's so amazing. Everybody should love it. And for him, it's TimeSplitters. But like, we have to acknowledge that this is a bias. Like, this is something that I love because it was part of my childhood. And if it weren't part of my childhood, I wouldn't love it anywhere near as much. Like, if I played this now, or if I were this age now going back to it, I don't think I would be this like lovey-dovey towards it. I think I'd have many more negative things to say. I'd have plenty of problems. Bro, the running animations were so stupid. They were so bad. It's terrible. Just wretched. So, but I mean, going back to this, so far, like, I don't think any argument has really been made other than when I was a kid, I played games that I loved a lot. And I kind of need more than that. Carl, thank you for the £2. Here's a couple of quid for you. Best channel IMO. Oh, thank you, my friend. That's very sweet of you. And thank you. You didn't have to donate, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Era of couch gaming would not last forever, though. And in fact, it was soon coming to a close. Monday, March 15th, 2004.
Yeah, to be very titled this section nostalgia. Yeah, well, that's why I'm hoping that, like, as he gets through this, he can transition to, like, arguing that, yes, this is, like, a nostalgic bias, yes, but maybe he's going to talk about how, like, these big publishers are trying to take advantage and capitalize on nostalgia while taking these old franchises and then reworking them in a greedy way, in a way that sucks to profit. Like, there's certain things he could argue here. So I think he's laying the groundwork. I'd say this is probably I don't know. I think he's probably setting it up for something, hopefully. Proto, I feel like Donkey has a similar vibes in his video. He really discounts modern games and primarily seem to just think Super Mario and Donkey Kong or retro type games are better. Yeah, well, and let's be real. Some people just like retro games more. My brother Jacob likes retro games mostly. He doesn't really play a ton of modern stuff other than like maybe Apex and stuff like that. But some people just prefer retro games, and I'm fine with that. But it's when you say like the games industry is dying. That's when I'm like, I don't know if you can say that. Like, if you just like retro games more than modern games, cool. But that's a separate, like, that's a subjective thing. That's fine. But going all the way the next step to the games industry is dying because I like older games better. Like, that's a bit much.
This was the day that I created my first RuneScape account. It would be my first introduction into the world of MMOs, the genre that encapsulated everything
Michael,
that I
thank
loved
you.
about gaming. The adventure, the immersion, puzzle solving, crafting, and I could play and enjoy it with my friends and hundreds of people across the world. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was loving every minute of it. Later that year, a certain other MMO would release, World of Warcraft. Unfortunately, there was one issue. I still had dial-up internet. It would be a few years until I got out of dial-up hell, so in the meantime the only way I could play World of Warcraft was either by playing at friends' house or sneaking the installation onto the school computers in the library, which I absolutely did. They were not very well managed at the time. I wouldn't hit max level in World of Warcraft until the tail end of Burning Crusade just before Wrath. But by then, World of Warcraft was the game that I played, and it would remain that way for several years until about halfway through my senior year of high school.
Okay.
That's when I got beta access to Starcraft II: Wings of Liberty. My friends and I were so hyped for this game, we spent every day in school in our computer class just playing Starcraft II. I fell in love with competitive gaming and esports because of Starcraft II. It was the first game that I actually tried to play competitively and work my way up a ranked ladder. I would practice almost every day with friends, watch Day 9 and Husky videos, aspirations of going pro. I only ever made it to Plat, but getting to Plat felt incredible. I remember my friend and I used to wake up at like 5 in the morning to watch the GSL. And in 2011, as a broke college student in Orlando, Florida, I bought a ticket to MLG using a literal bag of coins. But it was such an incredible experience. My friends and I got to meet all of our favorite players, Huck, In Control. We also got to...
Is that... I can't tell. Is that Super Young Destiny? It kind of looks like Super Young Destiny. I don't know. It kind of looks like it. Doesn't it? Am I crazy? It has to be. It looks a hell of a lot like him if it's not. Like, hell of a lot like him. Who calls their child Destiny? His name is Steven, but I think you knew that. Or maybe his name is Destiny and his actual streamer name is Steven. Who knows? I did see a clip. It was like a compilation of like cringy debate bro moments. And there was a debate between like, I think it was Destiny and then like Red Pill debate coach or whatever his name is, who's just like an egomaniacal, like malignant narcissist. Like that Red Pill debate coach guy is like actually out of his mind. And, the whole, like, it's a 3-minute clip of the guy just like calling him a girl because he has a girl's name. It was like actually hilarious. It was ridiculous. And he's like, my audience is gonna really enjoy seeing that I'm debating a woman because you have a name like Destiny. And he has this really weird forced laugh. The whole thing was so cringe. It was horrible. It was horrible. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this is Destiny. I'm pretty sure. I don't know, was Destiny known for StarCraft or like, is that something he did? I don't know, maybe.
Got to meet Day 9, Husky, Artosis, and Tasteless. It would be my very first, and unfortunately, my very last live gaming event. And eventually, Starcraft II would give way to League of Legends, which a few years later gave way to Smite, which would be the last competitive esport.
If you want to see Destiny and something funny, look up Destiny and Mike from PA. just Mike from PA versus Destiny. It's actually hilarious because Mike from PA is like a well-known lol cow, and it's pretty hilarious.
Game that I played seriously. None of them really grabbed me in the same way that Starcraft II did, and I'm not sure any other competitive esport ever will. This was about the peak of gaming in my life. The best of it all came before, and I feel like I can pinpoint the exact year that the steep slope downward began. And that year was 2014.
Okay.
This was the year that Starcraft was all but dead. The year Warlords of Draenor came out, the first ever World of Warcraft expansion that I did not buy or play. This was the year Destiny released and was a massive disappointment. This was the year that Smite introduced loot boxes. This was the year that WildStar released and failed. And every year on from this point just seemed to be one big disappointment after another. It felt more and more common for games to release unfinished or broken or have some predatory monetization. Every year seemed worse than the last. Gaming seemed different now.
Okay. Going into this, I'll say gaming has changed. It's gotten bigger than ever. More players are engaging with games than ever. And so the industry has changed. As for individual games, nothing's stopping developers from making games that appeal to every single niche that exists. And if anything, it's more realistic to expect that companies will be able to do that than ever before. So I am not totally sure what approach he'll have for the rest of this in terms of arguing that games have changed and it's fundamentally different. I would guess most of this is going to just be sort of showcasing a bunch of games that have loot boxes and heavy monetization and that are buggy and broken, which I agree. And the great thing that we can all celebrate is that almost all of those games that did that stuff flopped and lost money, which is why the next cycle from those studios and publishers, they didn't do that same thing. They tried to change their approach and do something different, which is how it's supposed to work. If you put out something that's a broken pile of garbage that's heavily monetized, the game is supposed to perform poorly, and then it's supposed to fix itself later on. The market kind of corrects itself, but sometimes it just takes time. So it's really easy for us to look like in the moment and then freak out. And it's like, no, you gotta have a wider perspective.
Grown incredibly fast since I first picked up a controller. In fact, in 2021, the games industry raked in more cash than music and film combined. A good bit of this growth can be attributed to the rise of mobile gaming, which in 2021 made up 45% of the total revenue in the industry. And of course, the stench of this heaping pile of cash would not go unnoticed by the insectoid swarm of C-suite executives. And with their grubby little shit-stained appendages and their dungest touch, they've pushed hard to make console and PC gaming monetization more closely resemble that of a mobile game, attempting to normalize all the same underhanded tactics which apply psychological manipulation in various ways to pry as much money as they can out of its users in a
So this is one thing I actually find really interesting and compelling potentially, is the argument that the reason the gaming industry has changed is because the way that they're monetizing specifically is tied up in psychological manipulation, trying to repackage basically gambling in the form of video game engagement. And that's what makes it unacceptable. And that I find much more interesting. I'm much more intrigued by that discussion. And I think that there's an argument to be made there, especially with loot boxes. I don't know how you argue with a straight face that loot boxes are like not gambling. I really don't know how you argue that with a straight face. But I think there is something to be said where, like, clearly they're trying to take advantage of people who are prone to gambling addictions, and they're trying to push them into this situation where they would potentially or could potentially find themselves spending a lot of money on things that they probably shouldn't be spending money on. Luckily, these things have largely left the industry. Now loot boxes really are not a thing, except for like Apex. But that's the only big game I can think of that still uses loot boxes. I don't know, maybe I'm just not familiar with like a ton. But I mean, this is, again, it's easy for us to look at one release in 2017 or 18 and be like, see, gaming sucks. But the market adjusted after these things were caught so negatively. FIFA, yeah, well, I think we can all agree FIFA should be burned in a fire and should have a long time ago. So does CSGO use loot boxes? I honestly don't know. Like I said, I'm not too familiar with all of these games. Like these more established multiplayer games, but I know CS:GO also sells skins, like, and they have sites where you can gamble and like roll for skins, and like it's straight up gambling. I think that's part of the reason CS:GO is as huge as it is, because it kind of enables people who have gambling proclivities to get into it while also playing video games. So I would agree, those are examples of really bad loot box things. But these new franchises that came out and tried to do it, it was not well received at all. This one he's showing right here, Shadow of War, was basically bullied into oblivion, to the point where they stripped out all of these things after the game launched because it was so roundly mocked and detested because of it. And even now, the game still is kind of a shell of its former self because it was built on all of this. But me opening up FIFA as you say that, that's awesome. Yeah, but it's really, really interesting. I think that there is an argument to be made that there's a really unethical aspect to what a lot of these companies tried to do with loot boxes. I hate the idea of like paying $20 for a skin in like Call of Duty, but at least with that, you know what you're buying. I still think it's freaking dumb for people to pay $20 for a skin. And I think the people buying those skins for $20 probably would also agree that that's freaking dumb. But at least you know what you're getting. You know, you're saying, okay, I'm going to put $20 up and I'm going to get this digital thing in exchange. Okay. That, I think it's stupid, but at least that's transparent.
Predatory manner. Whether it's feeding off of players' addictions by implementing gambling adjacent mechanics, or their frustration by creating problems and selling back the solutions.
And I agree. One of my problems with like Assassin's Creed recently is that they build these games basically balanced around you using an XP booster. And then if you don't use the XP booster, then the game is a total grind and miserable. And it's like, yeah, so they created a problem and now they're selling you the solution. Totally agree. Totally agree. Major, major problem. And thankfully, when games tend to do that, they usually are reviewed poorly and roundly mocked by the industry. Usually. The only exceptions are with franchises where people have become accustomed to that type of behavior and thing. Such as, you know, in the case of a lot of these multiplayer shooters and games. But even in cases like that, like Diablo Immortal, that game was also heavily mocked at launch and received a lot of hate because it like broke. If you leveled up to max level, like the game just didn't work anymore because they assumed nobody would ever be like crazy enough to actually spend all that money. Luke, are you going to be playing Diablo 4? Maybe. I'm honestly not sure. I've never played a ton of those games, those types of games, but this could be the first one. I don't know.
Or FOMO with limited time.
The point remains that unethical practices have always existed in the industry. Yes. I think that part of it now, and this is true of like news events and everything, a lot of things now are just more visible. So like, for example, Assassin's Creed Unity, a lot of those bugs that became iconic, like the faceless thing, you know, the ones like, by the way, go to LukeStevensTV.com and buy some stickers. Do that right now. LukeStevensTV.com, LukeStevensTV.com. Okay, buy some stickers. If you buy all three, I'll throw in a Just Wow sticker that's signed before they're all gone. Like if I just look up AC Unity bugs, this. Yeah, first thing to come up. This bug was actually incredibly rare. This happened to just a handful of people. But it was so eye-catching, for lack of a better word, that now people permanently associate the two things together. People are like, oh yeah, no, that's AC Unity. It's the game that had, it's the game that had like the skinless faces for everybody. So Yeah, it's very iconic, but that was very, very rare. It just spread quickly. And that's the thing, like, you can start to feel like, oh my God, the country's falling apart. In Ohio, a train derailed, and then there's a massive smoke cloud, and then also over here, Putin's doing some shit. The world's falling apart. And it's like, stuff like this always happened throughout all of human history. The difference was 20 years ago, it would have taken weeks to find out. And even then, you probably would have seen it in a small article in the newspaper. So if you didn't read the newspaper, you never found out about it. It's the same thing, like my parents do this all the time, where they're like, oh, well, back in the like 60s or 70s or 80s, when I was growing up, we didn't have, you know, kids getting kidnapped. It's like, well, like we can demonstrate that they were kidnapped. You just didn't hear about it. Like it's just a matter of how visible these things are. So with this stuff, shady stuff has always existed in the industry. It's always been a problem. Like we had a gaming crash in the 80s because of how shady these companies tried to be. And, you know, it's always been a problem. It's always been an issue. It's just now very, very visible. And a lot of people have grown accustomed to it and have just learned to deal with it. So they just buy the stuff anyways. They kind of get over it. Yes, by the way, yes, like Rocky said, there's the link to the video. Boop. Why isn't gaming fun anymore from the pie face? Like I said, I think this guy's doing really, really good work. I'm actually very impressed. He's making videos far better than I was at this size of a channel. So I'll give him that. Props.
Buy now expensive skins. The online nature of the live service model has primed games for these sort of exploitations. It's not completely without its pushback though, as we gamers have been successful in combating some of these changes, as is the case with loot boxes, as we've pretty much eradicated those from most PC and console games at this point. Though it definitely seems like a losing battle, as every year more ground gives way to the normalization of such strategies, in like a 1 step forward, 10 step back kind of way. For example, if we look back, it wasn't that long ago when DLC was considered outrageous. It was seen as devs taking content out of the original game and holding it back to sell later. But as always, the ground gave way, and the conversation shifted to whether or not it was day one DLC, or how much effort they put into the DLC, if the content was worth it. Fast forward to today, where similar conversations are being had about the pay-to-win debate, where at first any pay-to-win is completely unacceptable, to now being able to find conversations about how a certain game is not that pay-to-win. But
I would like, this stuff is normalized, sure. My, like, shady stuff's always existed in the industry, like we said. So if you're saying the industry is different now than it was, I'm not sure you can say that. It's just like they've changed tactics a little, but fundamentally the same types of people are still running these companies. They're just trying to find different ways of doing this. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is normalized. I would agree. People are more used to it now. But all of this is sort of tangential to the point that is trying to be made here, which is that the gaming industry as a whole is like seriously sick. It's ill. There's some sort of problem that needs to be remedied quickly. And it's like I said at the top of this whole segment, where I was like, yeah, it's really easy for us to take a couple of examples and games that are doing really, really poorly. Like, you know, we've pulled up, it's kind of been revolving around maybe 6 or 7 games as the prime examples of greedy, heavy monetization crap. And it's easy to look at those, but like, why aren't we talking about Elden Ring? Why aren't we talking about, like, I mean, honestly, anything from Nintendo, because those games are always really, really solid on launch. Why aren't we talking about, unless it's Splatoon, why are we talking, or aren't we talking about, you know, Naughty Dog's titles? You know, like, there's a lot of games that you could talk about where this doesn't hold up and is a great example of a really high quality, artistic, and great game. But we don't talk about those because those aren't convenient and they don't help prove the point, you know? So it's just, it's easy to start to feel demoralized very quickly when you hear all of these things. But really, like 6, 7 games that are really, really bad in the span of 15 years really is not and as bad as you would expect for like a $200 billion industry, you know?
Ian Allen super chatted $20. I don't hate the idea of cosmetic microtransactions. I do hate that they are expensive. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla they made a bunch of absurd cosmetics that didn't fit the setting and charged $10 plus for them. No thank you.
Yeah, Ian, I would agree. And I think from what I've heard, the rumblings are that most people seem to agree with you. I haven't heard that they are selling very many of those cosmetics. Like the straight up Iron Man one that leaked, that was terrible. That was laughable. But thank you again, Ian, for the 20. And I agree. Like, we can say, oh, it sucks that cosmetic microtransactions are normalized. But like, also it's the same thing when people are like, back in the day, games didn't ship with day one patches. They just shipped. And it's like, yeah, that's why there were bugs in some of these games that you grew up playing that were never fixed, that are like key to speedrunners breaking the game quickly. Whereas if the game had launched nowadays, it would have been patched out and fixed pretty quickly because they would have only discovered it after the fact, and they can improve the game after it launches. It's not an excuse to launch a broken game, but nowadays you can continue improving the game, polishing, refining, improving performance after it's come out. That's awesome. Like one of the main strats in like Donkey Kong, is it Donkey Kong 64? I think is what it is. There's like a whole strat for speedrunners tied to throwing up as many like oranges or whatever they are, or coconuts or something, as quickly as you can, because it causes the frame rate to plummet, which breaks the game's physics and allows you to like clip into objects in a certain way. And if the game launched nowadays, that would just be fixed and they could try to get it running more stable. You know, but like, it's really, is it bananas? It's bananas. I don't know why I'm picturing oranges in my head when I see this like screenshot in my head of them doing it. It's always oranges. Anyway, but it's again, it's just this sort of like old man River sitting down there on his rocking chair being like, back in my day, things were better. It's like, yeah, they were different. I don't know if they were better. They were just different. There's also a lot of things we can do nowadays that are way cooler. You know, and for me, one of the biggest things is the accessibility of indie developers to be able to come out and do some amazing things, and have the support of developers in that way. I think that, or the support of publishers in that way. I think that can be great. Luke, thank you for the 2. Vala Llama shop armor was stupid. Valaha, I'm guessing is what it was. Shop armor was also stupid. A lot of the stuff they did there was broken. A lot of it. Luke, will you play Armored Core 1, 2, and 3 in anticipation for 6? I should warn you. If not, I will unsubscribe. I don't even know where to play Armored Core 1, 2, or 3. I'll be real. I have no idea where you would even do that. Are they even on like PC, or would I have to get like an emulator or something? I don't know. I have 400 hours in Valaha, and I hate myself. I tried so hard to like that game. Yeah, you did. But you know what?
Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Sometimes it just isn't working. Sometimes. Anyway, let's keep
Playing
chatting.
about monetization in games is nothing new or original. In fact, it's an oversaturated market, and at this point, just feels like beating a dead horse. It seems you'll never get enough people to care about this topic, and until that happens, nothing will change. Instead, I'd like to talk about a bit of a hot take here, that in the past 10 years, gaming really hasn't changed much at all. The gaming industry feels pretty stagnant. If I compare games as they are now to how I thought they would be by now as a kid, the picture is very disappointing. As a kid who just discovered MMOs like RuneScape and World of Warcraft, I was blown away by the idea of what MMOs could be in the future. I would hop off World of Warcraft and go play Dungeons & Dragons and think, man, one day World of Warcraft is going to have the same level of choice and consequence that I can have with my imagination playing D&D. Now obviously that hasn't happened yet, and as a kid I didn't know anything about game development. But I've heard a similar observation from Razboon in his video series Gaming for a Non-Gamer, which is a great series and I recommend you check it out, where he discusses his wife's disappointment discovering video games for the first time.
Her expectations for what she thought she could do in each game were always different than the reality, and I think as she realized that games were more simple than she had first assumed, some of the intrigue about them faded.
There's a massive lack of innovation and risk-taking in the AAA space, as we see games like Skyrim being released a billion times, The Last of Us is getting its 3rd version of the game, Call of Duty ran out of ideas and decided to just loop back around and start re-releasing their games in order again, hoping nobody would notice, but they somehow made all the games worse so everyone noticed. Which brings me to my next point, where not only are companies not really interested in innovating at all, but they seem to be actively taking steps backwards in innovation. If you look at something like the original Fallout's super in-depth dialogue system versus Fallout 4's dialogue system, it's a huge step back. And that's a tame example. It gets so much worse. Blizzard, for example, figured out that they can retroactively ruin a 20-year-old game with Warcraft 3 Reforged. Well, I guess that was pretty innovative. The only real innovations coming out of this industry are coming from indie developers and modders, the latter of which is responsible for the two biggest genres in the past decade, and that's without even the expectation of getting paid. Isn't that weird? Kind of goes against the conventional capitalist thinking, huh? Looking at the...
No, I mean, indie devs do get paid. Modders, I guess not, you know, I guess, but I don't know how you could say that like the biggest games, what did he say exactly? Biggest
The
games?
latter of which is responsible for the two biggest genres in the past decade.
Two biggest genres in the last decade. Okay, but we're looking at games. Like coming up with a game mode is cool, but the games have to be delivered. That's a little bit of a separate thing. Like I would agree, innovation has stagnated with big AAA releases. Again, it's partially because they don't have to pump out crazy different things so long as people continue to purchase them. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If you and I are still playing Call of Duty 15, 17, whatever, then they're just going to keep putting it out because they don't need to change it. Because why would they, right? They don't need to because people are still buying it. They're still doing it. And this is why, like, it's fair to, like, acknowledge these things, but also at the end of the day, the community has grown larger than individual takes. Perhaps unfortunately, but it's just so big now that when they're developing games like Call of Duty, they're looking at the mass public that's going to be playing it, the millions and millions of people who are going to play it, and they're developing the game for them. And so while that can be frustrating that they're developing the game for somebody that's not you and that they like the game but you don't, that's frustrating. I get it, but it's also just, it is the case. Like there's not much you can do. And then as for innovation, these games have gone from costing maybe like $1 to $5 million to produce to the biggest games now being $50 to $100 to $200 million projects. These games are massive. They require teams of thousands of people to develop, whereas back in the day, it took a team of maybe 100 people a couple of years or a few years to put something together that was really cool. Games have just gotten crazy complicated, crazy difficult to keep functioning long term. And that means that you need more time in the oven. And because the investment's so large, you can't take the same risks that you used to be able to take when the projects were smaller. Part of the reason that we got It Takes Two is because that was a smaller game by a smaller studio that didn't cost as much, so they could experiment and take a risk. That game very easily could have flopped horribly. Would not have been that difficult to flop something like that, but thankfully it did really, really well. So, you know, I get the sentiment. I totally understand the sentiment. But this is also partially, he acknowledges indie stuff. I would say indie games are part of the gaming industry. If his point is just that massive quadruple A game development is stagnant and boring and heavily monetized now, I'd say yes, and we don't have a problem. But if the thesis is that the games industry as a whole is significantly ill, then, you know, that changes things.
And that's without even the expectation of getting paid. Isn't that weird? Kind of goes against the conventional capitalist thinking, huh? Looking at the trajectory of the industry, it's really hard to not just be depressed about it all and wonder if the industry can ever course correct. It's weird to think that...
And again, I will just reaffirm this. Again, he's saying that, like, he shows the example of Fortnite as being like an example of all of these problems kind of concentrated. But Fortnite regularly has millions upon millions of players. A lot of them are young, yes, but that's because they're building the game for those younger audiences. Call of Duty, you might think that Call of Duty is like morally and creatively bankrupt, kind of like I do. But that's because the game isn't being developed for you and I. It's being developed for the people that are currently playing it, and that's millions and millions of people. So just because the game isn't for us doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything is collapsing. Like it's a very sort of self-centric way of looking at the industry. Because again, if we're looking at the industry, you have to look at it from a bird's eye view, top down over everything. You don't get to just be like, well, but I don't like this game, therefore industry dying. It's a little more complicated than that. Even streamers are still playing Fortnite, more positive compared to COD. Yeah, no, a lot of the biggest streamers are moving over to Fortnite again because Call of Duty is burning them out, and so is everything else. And they just have to wait until Dr. Disrespect's NFT game comes out, and then they can win a $100,000 skin while extracting, guys. Don't you know?
Things like YouTube, Reddit, and all these other social media sites haven't really been around that long. And yet it's sometimes hard to remember what it was like before they existed.
Yeah, YouTube's like 2005.
These sites have made data mining, crowdsourced information, and video guides all accessible to everyone at all times. In some cases, the internet will have every bit of information about every mechanic and secret in a given game before they even release. And all of these things have drastically changed how we play video games. Let's take a look at a game like World of Warcraft. If I had to describe how I feel playing retail WoW in one word, it would be emptiness. Not because of a lack of content necessarily, so much as the game just kind of feels soulless. Where before, the game was about adventure and discovery, it is instead now a game about optimization. It's essentially a solved game where add-ons and logs have optimized gameplay to a T with little room for experimentation or creativity. Which is fine. I mean, no one likes to play suboptimally. I'm not trying to vilify optimization, as it can be quite fun for some people. Take speedrunning for example. Speedrunning is such an interesting hobby to me. It's something I've always wanted to get into, but I've always felt a little intimidated by. The stuff that people are able to achieve with speedrunning is truly mind-blowing. Some of which is only really possible because of the interconnected nature of modern gaming, where sharing glitches and exploits is part of the fun of collectively iterating on runs to shave off more and more time. But then if you look at something like RuneScape, one of the most solved games that has become literally all about the optimization, you'll find a community who's made it a tradition of coming up with off-the-wall challenges and restrictions inflicted upon their accounts, also known as snowflake accounts, so that they are forced to forge their own path. There's no guide to follow.
DM me later.
This is
Wanna talk
interesting.
about some whitey stuff. Wondering what insights you may have. Not reaching all 60k subs, it feels like.
Sure, yeah, no, I can give that a shot. This is interesting. This is like he's talking about the sort of mystery of a new game, the excitement that comes with the unknown and the adventure and exploration. However, like it's true for like literally every game. Like he brings up RuneScape. RuneScape also has had this, and a lot of these other games like WoW do this, of course, now. And so it's like, yeah, but if you don't want to like look up guides on how to play Elden Ring in the most efficient way, like just don't. Nobody's forcing you to, and especially with single player games or like these PvE games, like nobody has to go out and do that. Like you're choosing to do that, so it seems weird to complain about it. Like I agree, the first run through of a game like Elden Ring is going to be more magical than the second run through where you already know where everything is. I agree, but that's like I don't get it. Like again, he's saying like the industry or the world has changed, so the way we play games is different now. So because the world is different now, maybe it's our fault that the industry feels different. But like, again, I think so much of this is just that he has a strong nostalgia bias towards older games that he really enjoyed back in the day. And now he doesn't enjoy these games as much for, I'm sure, a handful of reasons. But he's trying to figure out why that is. And so it's just kind of like a broad, almost dismissal of the industry, when in reality it's just, like I said at the top of this, it's probably that he's just burnt out. And that happens to everybody. Everybody. I like new movies. I tell YouTube not to show me anything, but I will say there are things like some a-hole in publishing an article hours after release to spoil major things. Yeah, I can see that could be frustrating. I think the guides and help has much more of an impact on PvP games. It's now so easy to go online and learn a game's meta that creates incentive for everyone to learn and play by the meta. Yeah, JJ. And I think part of it is also with games like Warzone. Everybody, it seems like everybody I run into in like Apex and Warzone nowadays, if I play, is like a TTV username, and so they're clearly trying to make it as a streamer, so they're all trying to use the best metas, and they're all trying to do their thing, and you know, so I don't know, I think it's a combination of a lot of different things, but it's like, especially in a PvE game, I just don't understand how you can complain about guides existing. You know, like, nobody's forcing you to read it. In a PvP game, yeah, if you want to be competitive, you got to do it, but in a PvE game, I don't get that. I played Elden Ring and went and got the Meteorite staff, and knowing its mainstream OP infamy later, it kind of subtracts from the experience a bit. Interesting. I mean, maybe, I guess if you look it up, then maybe you feel like maybe you cheated or something. I don't, like the Sword of Night and Flame. If you just use the Sword of Night and Flame, and you're like, oh, this is an awesome weapon. You play the game and you have a good time, and you find the game pretty easy, and then you look it up later and people are like, lol, you basically cheated. Then I guess that could kind of spoil the fun, but like, that's more an issue of peer pressure and feeling insecure. Like, if somebody told me that, I'd be like, oh, sounds like you're jealous you didn't find it. Maybe, like, you should look in the mirror if you want to be miserable while playing games. I just played the game and I had fun. That's it.
On how to clear one of the hardest raids in old school RuneScape if you're not allowed to leave the swamp zone. But one man, after 3 years of theory crafting, grinding, and 33 very entertaining YouTube videos, was able to accomplish that goal, with hundreds and thousands of people watching and loving it. So clearly, the problem for World of Warcraft isn't just optimization itself. It's that optimization isn't just confined to the few who enjoy it, but instead sort of forced onto everyone else. With all these tools available to everyone and things like...
Again, I think this is only really... Did he even say kind of forced?
But instead sort of forced onto
Sort of forced. It's not, though. If you're playing a PvE game, it's not. If you're playing a PvP, like, competitive game... I totally get that, and I would agree. Like the DMR, whether you liked it or not, if you weren't using a DMR during DMR zone, you weren't going to have fun. It was a 2-tap kill no matter where you were on the map, because it didn't have, like, fall off. It was ridiculous. It totally broke the game. And the only way you could be competitive and have a chance of placing in the top 20 is if you were also running a DMR. So I would agree, like, that's an instance where you need the meta and you got to figure it out. I think that's an extreme example, because that was an example of, like, the game being broken for a period of time. I will admit, like, I'm not super familiar with WoW balancing and metas within World of Warcraft, so I don't know if it actually makes, like, that big of a difference. But, like, again, nobody's forcing you to use the guide. Like, if you don't enjoy being the try-hard min-maxer, that's okay. Just don't do it.
Everyone else. With all these tools available to everyone and things like Raider.io assigning public completion scores, everyone is expected to be fully optimized or not play the game. Because again, no one likes to play suboptimally. Ignorance truly is bliss. It's my opinion that this is the real reason why World of Warcraft has been struggling. Like Asmongold has said, Blizzard has ignored the casual audience and failed to produce fun and compelling activities that aren't just about the optimization. Instead, they just continue to double down on the raids and dungeons, catering to this nature of gameplay. Now, as of this recording, Dragonflight has not released yet, so maybe that will be the expansion that fixes this issue. But it's not just retail. A lot of players were excited about Classic and logged in expecting to recapture that nostalgic sense of adventure. But things are too different now. The way we play games is too different now. The game didn't seem nearly as hard as they remembered, the world not as vast. But I think it comes down to the fact that every facet of the game has been solved already, and that the joy of the original release lied in the discovery and the journey. Now, this is not everyone's opinion. There's still plenty of people that very much enjoyed Classic. This is mostly just anecdotal sentiment from me and my friends. But I do think that this might be why so many people get excited whenever a new MMO is released. It's a chance to discover things for the first time, to not be beholden to the methods and builds that someone else already figured.
Yeah, the vibe I get from this whole section is that he just doesn't like the try-hard min-maxing. And that's great. I agree. Some games I do love it. But, like, in this type of game, yeah, I can understand why you don't love that. But, like, I feel like we're straying pretty far from the point of why isn't gaming fun anymore? Like, if your frustration is with tryhards and the more committed min-maxing audience taking over MMOs you used to like, okay. But Like, it's strayed pretty far.
Figured out, and everyone is expected to use. A chance for you to be the one that discovers those methods. But, for better or for worse, this is just the way the world is now. Maybe someday a game will come out that is immune to this phenomenon. A game that can't be solved, where the discovery never goes away. Doesn't seem possible, but who knows? Maybe.
No, I think you're asking for a magical game. Like, games eventually will get old, no matter what it is, no matter how much you play it. Eventually, the game will start to feel old. That's why even people like Asmongold, who have played thousands of hours of various MMOs, even they are like, yeah, no, the game is not perfect. It's definitely got some problems here and there. It's definitely got to be tweaked. They'll get burnt out. They'll go play some other game for a little while. It's just a staple of video games. Like, it's a staple. What video is this? It's titled right here. You can see the title. I left it on screen from the pie face. But if you just look up that, then you can see it.
Maybe someday. I don't feel like a different person. I feel like I always have been and always will be me. But I've changed my mind and opinions on a lot of things in the past 10 years. Growing up and dealing with adult responsibilities can be really stressful. You're faced with a lot of change and uncertainty, and it can be really easy to succumb to worry and regret. But worry and regret are just a waste of time. Time that could be better spent having fun. You know, people say video games are a waste of time, but personally, I think that having fun and enjoying your life is the best way to spend your time. But what do you do if you no longer enjoy your favorite hobby? With this fog hanging over my head, I began reminiscing on how I used to enjoy games. I used to spend countless hours grinding the ladder in Starcraft II, working on refining builds, seeing small improvements over time, making quantifiable progress in a skill feels so good. The dopamine. But today, if you ask me to play just about any competitive game, I could not be fucking bothered. I haven't played League of Legends in like 9 years, but I booted it up a couple of months ago. My friends were telling me about all the new champions and the new metas and the new builds, and I just wanted to go take a nap. Is it because my attention span is shot? Is the lack of elasticity in my rotting brain protesting against me trying to shove even more useless shit into it? Maybe both. I used to have the drive to spend hours learning everything I could about a new game.
You might not like this, but I'm getting the vibe that the answer to this entire video is just simply, you grew up. I'm starting to get the vibe, man. It's like, yeah, back when I was a teen, I loved these games, and in college, I loved games, and right around the time I got out of college and went out into the real world and became an adult, then these games started to like feel needlessly difficult. Like, that's very common. Like, people get out of college, they all of a sudden have a full-time job that they have to work in order to pay for their existence. They have other things they're concerned with and stressed about. And so sitting down at their desk and starting to be stressed about grinding this dungeon or trying to min-max your character, that just all of a sudden your perspective has changed and it doesn't feel like that's a good use of your time anymore. That happens to everybody. Like, that is a thing. I played a hell of a lot more multiplayer games, I'll tell you what, before Lachlan came, before my little dude joined our little family. But now that he's here, yeah, it doesn't sound fun to like grind out a battle royale to work my way up. Like, and that's okay. That's okay. Your life got bigger than just these video games. That's okay. I understand the desire for that nostalgic feeling of getting lost in those games again, like when you were a teenager, when life was simpler. I get it, but I don't think that's gaming's fault. I think that's life's fault. And I feel for you, because that magic is something that is really, truly special. To be able to actually experience this stuff and to escape to another world, that's something I hope everybody gets to experience in their lifetime. It's amazing. But I'm starting to really get the vibe that this is more a reflection of what adulthood and life has done to you, my friend, and not necessarily gaming as a whole. And yeah, like Drinner says, kiddos and family are the real adventure, man. Yeah, and honestly, I cannot wait for the time when I can actually like play games with Lockie. It's going to be amazing. Can you imagine? Oh, it's going to be so much fun. When we can build Lego sets together, when we can do that, yeah. I'm not saying everybody needs kids, but I'm just saying, yeah, it builds and adds to life. You know, I feel like life is bigger than just games now for me, and I'm not necessarily bummed about it, you know? Bro, kids only want to play Roblox. No son of mine will.
Nowadays, I'd be lucky to stick with the game for more than a couple weeks before I'm over it, regardless of if I actually finished it or not. So then, are there any games that I do enjoy? After so many disappointing letdowns and trying to enjoy games that just start to annoy me after 2 weeks, this question legitimately crossed my mind. And at the peak of my jadedness, one game proved to me that I did still indeed have the capacity to fall in love with the game. And that game was Valheim. A game that isn't even finished yet, but a game that so perfectly created a sense of adventure and discovery that it reminded me why I love gaming to begin with. So it seems there may still be remnants of a gamer deep underneath all the jadedness. I've proven to myself that I definitely haven't outgrown the hobby. Maybe I've just been playing the wrong games. And sure, the world is different, and the way we play games is different, but there's still fun to be had. And despite the industry's best efforts to cannibalize itself, there will always be passionate indie developers and modders to pick up the slack and make good games and experiences. And maybe that's enough. Well, it kind of has to be enough. But I'm determined to rekindle my love of gaming. And that will be my New Year's resolution. I will begin my search to find the fun.
Good. It's a really wholesome, nice way to end it. And I would agree. Like, you got to find the fun. And more than anything, it seems like his tastes have just simply changed. The MMO grind for min-maxing stuff, I think, is just not in line, and that's okay.
He took my thing.